Welcome to the D-Shift podcast, where we provide inspiration, motivation, and education to help you transition from the challenges of divorce to discover the freedom and ability to live life on your own terms. Are you ready? Let's get this shift started. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the D-Shift podcast. And those who have been listening along for a while know if I get to interview a Canadian, we have to go Canada.
Go Oilers.
Yeah, because we are looking at the Oilers too here. So this is really fantastic. I want to introduce you to my guest. Her name is Stacey Sanderson. She is a registered psychotherapist and a published author with over a quarter of a century. Gosh, I can say that too, and it sounds so old. It makes me sound so old. It doesn't make you sound old, makes me sound old. Over 25 years of experience in helping people recover after narcissistic wounding. She offers heart-centered, holistic ways of regaining your power and identity. And Stacey has just come out with her book called Heart Wide Open. And I think that is just fantastic. So Stacey, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to sit with you, and I'm so excited to have this conversation today as we hopefully share some perspectives and some of this like over 50 years of wisdom that we've got combined.
Combined. I'm glad we could throw
Combined.
that. I'm glad we could throw that in. So, Stacey, you are a psychotherapist that has chosen to work with people who are really dealing with this issue of recovering after a relationship with a narcissist and being, and sometimes that's not just a spouse, that can be like a parent or another family member or things like that. What got you into this specific area of mental health?
Okay. Originally, this came from working as a therapist with primarily women in a primary care setting. So basically your family physician's office, team practice setting. But these women were coming in with complaints of anxiety, depression, and chronic illness. And this was before we had a better understanding of the impact of trauma and stress on the immune system. So these were women showing up with things like type 2 diabetes, multiple sclerosis, the digestive disorders, the thyroid disorders, fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, and chronic fatigue, right? That's sort of the laundry list of them. And purely out of curiosity, I started taking an attachment history and taking a look at their relationships and the patterns within those relationships. And lo and behold, there were some consistent patterns emerging in terms of the way that they'd been treated as children, usually how that pattern repeated in their adult relationship, and how their energy and power was drained in marriages, yes, but also in work settings, friendship groups, that kind of thing. So it is, yes, of course, it was fairly common to see that in a marital dynamic, but it wasn't limited to that. And not limited to the other individual having narcissistic personality disorder, but looking more broadly at patterns of narcissistic behavior as well, right?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that, and I want to, maybe I should just ask you this before I throw my uneducated opinion in here. What do you think about the idea that most people are somewhere on a spectrum between a people pleaser and a narcissist, and depending on where we are and what's going on, we slide up and down that scale throughout life. What do you think about that?
What an interesting question, because I was thinking about that very thing earlier today, that it is indeed a spectrum. The actual disorder that's diagnosed is defined in terms of someone's function and adaptability in relationship. I'm not very popular for what I'm about to say, but on the other end of that spectrum is something that I call codependent control or patterns of dependence. And actually, in much older, more depth psychology related ways of thinking about narcissism, that would be included, right, as part of that patterning. But the actual diagnosis is rare in the population for someone to meet that full diagnostic criteria. And yet we have people with a significant confirmation bias,
Right.
quote unquote, diagnosing, their
Right.
partners, their so-called loved ones. So it absolutely is a spectrum. And for those of us who are in narcissistic relationships, we have to look at where we ourselves live on that spectrum as well, in terms of our response to it.
Right. Well, thank you for that, because I've had other therapists come on and talk about their perception of that. I want to ask you, now that we've opened this door, I need to ask you this. Is it possible for two narcissists to be in a relationship together? Or is that not something that could potentially, is it always a codependent and a narcissist?
No, 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 no. I think that's more common. I think that it's very possible for two narcissists to be together. And I've done a little bit of research about this, and I actually think that in some cases that can work okay, right? There's a built-in protective mechanism
I was going to say,
for
because
each of them.
nobody's giving too much in that relationship, are they?
That's right. Although you could have a pattern of someone who's a bit more of like the closeted narcissistic style. So because the word covert just is very, very misleading. But you could have someone who's more out there and grandiose with someone who is more inverted with their narcissism. And I think that might be a much more common pattern. I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but I think a lot of celebrity partnerships are rooted in that dynamic there. I didn't drop any names. So that's where you would tend to see that. But if you, for example, had two partners, each of whom had that childhood attachment deficit, they could very easily be drawn to one another. And what often plays out then is something that is very staged and performative rather than something that's very real and authentic.
Right. Kind of like the always on power couple. Like you got to wonder
Yes.
about those kind of dynamics, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I've seen this in the couple space. Not often, but in the couple space, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, who's the narcissist, right? Which one of you is showing these traits and how is this playing out? And sometimes it's both of them, right?
Yeah.
And it becomes much more unwieldy. And they are not in a mediation or legal process. They're not going to seek what's fair. They are really in it to win it.
Right.
Right?
Right.
It becomes a zero-sum game in those
Right.
situations.
And thanks for I know that's a little bit off topic, but I find this kind of stuff fascinating. So tell me a little bit about the idea of narcissistic wounding and what that might look like, especially for somebody that has been dealing with, I'm going to just, even if they're not a diagnosed narcissist,
Yes.
but a high conflict, if they've gone through a high conflict divorce where the other person just, there's obviously a different game being played than just the division of property. How do people start to heal after that kind of an experience? And what is narcissistic wounding? Sorry, I actually threw in a backwards question there. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. And I'm going to try and unravel that a little bit. I think that many people who have narcissistic wounding, that began for them in childhood, right? That began for them in the parent or parent-child dyad or triad. And so this influences their sense of self, their sense of identity, self-esteem. This can mean that they've taken on a responsibility for how other people feel. This is the most common aspect of this. They can be highly vulnerable to something called intermittent reinforcement, where they're very, very malleable in terms of someone punishing them if they do something wrong and rewarding them if they do something right. And over time, that really chips away at their sense of self-awareness and knowing what's going on in the dynamic. And they lose their sense of self, right? That is that egoism, that codependent control, I think of, that I said earlier. But the other part of this is they tend to carry a lot of the blame for what's gone wrong in the relationship, and they will try and fix it all by themselves. And they often will try to oversee or facilitate the legal part on their own as well. So that they have a deep, deep burden of responsibility. Okay. And so that wound plays out with some real blind spots around what a normal, healthy power dynamic is. And it plays out in terms of being a sovereign individual, meaning master of their own domain, and seeing where that other person ends and they begin.
That's
And
a
that can,
thank you.
and that carries on often right through the divorce proceedings.
And into future relationships too, right?
Yes.
If they don't really make some adjustments in how they perceive themselves and maybe spend some time working through this with a therapist to help them identify
Yes.
these things.
And fear, right? They can be genuinely fearful of that other person. And even when that person is miles away from them, or, they haven't seen them for a year, or maybe, they legally have to stay away from one another,
Right.
they can still be highly fearful of that person.
Yes, yes. I work for, I think I told you this, I worked for, I think 6 years as a domestic violence client advocate. So we would get this, and the other thing that I really want to stress is when you talked about that intermittent rewards throughout the relationship, when you think about the whole cycle, we understand there's a cycle and it's not really a real cycle, but it's sort of a thing, right? Where you're punished or you're put down or you're negatively impacted by your partner for 5 or 6 or 7 times. And then all of a sudden they do these things they call love bombs, right? They do something really special for you and make you feel great. And then that gets you reconnected with them. And then maybe you go 10 times where they're doing something really shitty, for lack of a better word. But and people say, well, I don't get why they stay. But think about it. Why do people keep playing slot machines? Because every now and then you strike it big, right? That's what gambling addiction is all about. That intermittent reinforcement is so powerful.
Absolutely. And there's another very common reason why people stay. And that is because they subscribe to the illusion and the delusion that they bought at the beginning of the relationship. I know I'm sounding a little bit cynical, but in that love bombing phase, or in that phase where the narcissist is projecting their idealized love onto the other person, that's all it is. You are merely a mirror. You are merely giving them back this version of themselves. People believe that they can get back to that phase of the relationship and they can be with that person again. So this is the flip side of the devaluation and the discard, right? I should probably come up with a word for that that's better than love bombing. But it is this projection of the narcissist's own self-love onto that other person, right? Just like Echo in the original myth, right? So what did I hear someone say one time? There's, two people can't be in love with the same person in the relationship.
Right.
So it's so that's what it is. They're looking for that same idealized love that they thought was there in the beginning.
Right.
And I have heard that over and over again. And I have learned to just cut to the chase now and ask someone that when they're in the beginning phases or they're in that bargaining phase of trying to make the relationship work. We'll unpack that early idealization of that person, which is exactly what gets used in that intermittent reinforcement as well.
Right. So let me
Mhm.
ask you, Stacey, and I know you're such an expert on this. Do you think that a person, so we know that, well, I believe that people who have codependent tendencies can definitely change their behavior and can become strong, independent, assertive, and sovereign people, whether they're men or women, it doesn't matter. They can do that. Do you think the same is true that somebody who is a narcissist can develop not just empathetic statements to say, but can they develop real empathy and a real sense of like that give and take in a relationship, or is it not possible for the narcissist to change?
Well, it depends on where they are on that spectrum. I have been doing a meta-analysis, as I always do, of the data on the subject. So I do study, narcissism through that academic clinical lens. And for the record, the experts can't agree on this. So if the rest of everyone else has it figured out, good for you. But there are different components of empathy. There's affective empathy, which is knowing how someone feels, which I actually think narcissists can do when they need to, especially if it serves them. They can understand how someone feels, right? Having, someone in my life who's narcissistic, I can tell you that it looks like they're faking empathy, but if someone's going through something similar to them, I think they can identify with that from the place of self. What they have trouble with is cognitive empathy, right? Is the ability to take someone else's perspective and
Okay.
put themselves in someone else's shoes. So you can see why that would be confusing,
Right.
in a romantic relationship with them. I believe neurobiologically they lack the gray matter that governs empathy. It is a deficit and an impairment, right? So if we look at the far end of the spectrum, we have, sociopathy and psychopathy, right? Like a complete void of empathy. But I've watched in the therapy space, I've watched people who are high in traits of narcissism literally detour around when a moment of empathy is needed. And we do this culturally, right? We don't just do this in relationship. Like this happens all the time,
Sure.
that there are moments where empathy is required and it's not showing, right? It's
Right.
not showing its face or it's not being demonstrated. So if someone is high in narcissism, we can help coach them because therapy won't work. We can help coach them to change some aspects of their behavior. And it's not at all dissimilar to what is used with people on the autism spectrum, right? There are small behavioral changes. And it is, and then their partner would need to also play a role in that coaching,
Right.
right? But if we can, it's interesting to me that, we can describe, someone can describe their partner as being narcissistic and then also simultaneously believe that they can get better,
Right.
because it doesn't work like that, or we wouldn't have it listed in the way it is in the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual.
Right.
So personality disorders are not thought to be something that people can really heal or recover from.
Okay.
They're much more entrenched and they're not episodic. And this is very confusing for people. So the character disorders, the personality disorders are not episodic in the way that depression is. They are chronic and sustained over time.
So if you are in a relationship, I'm just going to throw this out here, and this is a non-medical, a non-psychological. If you're in a relationship with a narcissist and you think he's going to change, you're wrong. That's what I'm going to say. I'm going to be kind of blunt about that. Or she's going to change. You're wrong. So
Well, yeah.
if you are, I know that you have come up with with a framework of 5 pillars for recovery. Is
Yes.
that, could you share a little bit with that? Because I do think a lot of people are probably nodding along and going, okay, this makes sense to me. So I recognize that I'm dealing with this wound now from being with this relationship. What can I do to get started? And you've developed these 5 pillars.
Yes. The first one is awareness, and that's awareness of yourself, right? And then that dovetails with the second, which is knowledge, because knowledge is power. But you have to integrate what you know with yourself and your early attachment patterns with then that of the toxic person you're with, right? What is playing out there? And then the third is starting to change those patterns of that early conditioning and have a present day awareness of when you are stepping into those old patterns. And then the fourth one is about energy, power, and boundaries. And that is about, and this is a big one, recognizing when your energy is being drained and when you're giving your power away. And then jumping off of that, the fifth one is very much about living an authentic life and reclaiming the power, the beautiful gifts most of you have, speaking to this audience, and really bringing that back to yourself, standing in your power, and bringing the other 4 steps all together. If you picture a circle, to be very authentic and powerful in your life.
Yeah.
So these are 5, yeah, they're 5 distinct steps, but they all go together.
And that makes sense because I get that whole, it's a holistic approach to this
Yes.
recovery after this relationship. So I'd like to take a little moment from, because this is fascinating. I could go on and on and on forever on this because I just love learning about this because I think it's so prevalent. And I think people are using really bad behaviors now a lot more than they used to be. I think the kind of civil discourse is sort of heading out the window in a lot of situations. But tell us a little bit about your book, Stacey.
Sure. So this book really came into being as I was writing the curriculum for Transforming Pain to Power, which is the container for working with me. So it can be therapeutically oriented. It can be more of a coaching model, but it came to be that as I was mapping all of this out, it encompasses all the things that I want to say to people. So it begins as my representation of what I think narcissism is in the world, right? I think narcissism is very much part and parcel of, all of the pain and the wounding going on the earth, right? It's our human version of that, carried down through ancestral patterns. But the book looks at that and then calls out, if you will, some of the ways that we are doing this wrong, in the way that people are trying to seek help, and in the way that it's represented, out there in the internet ether. And then walks people through exactly those pillars that I've just said. And so it has, a narrative, kind of like if I could sit down with someone for a fireside chat, and then has a series of journal prompts at the end to get people thinking. And then it ends up with, bringing ritual celebration into life as a way of really anchoring into everything that's important to us. So it is about a third of what people actually get working with me. I made it a little bit simpler, but it really is a bit of my own commentary, as a mental health clinician who's been seeing how this subject has evolved over the last 25 years.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you. And that's definitely on, and I know it just came out. It's a brand new book. It's on my list of books I have to order and get in and read through. So, Stacey, this has been fantastic. And you have shared so much of your wisdom and insight and expertise in this area. Out of everything we've talked about, what is the one thing that you would like kind of to stand out in people's minds about this conversation?
Well, and I've been thinking about this today anyway, but I think it's really important that if you're going through a separation, the divorce process, that you have this awareness of that intermittent reinforcement and to know when the toxic person you're trying to leave is continuing to leverage their power throughout that process, and have a powerful group of people around you, right? Have a circle of supportive people who can, shake you into reality, right? Who can just remind you or call it out if you're falling back into those old, deeply ingrained patterns. That might be a coach, that might be a therapist, that might be your lawyer, a friend. It might be all of that, but to have that not just support, but that ability to not go it alone.
Yeah. And I love that idea of having somebody that can really, kind of push you to recognize when you're like nicely, professionally, but not
Yes.
let you slide back, because that's so common. Stacey, thank you for this. If people want to learn more about you, get hold of your book or find out more about, like I say, working with you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. The easiest way to get all the goods, as it says on the website, is to go to my website, which is www.staceysanderson.ca. That's where you'll find the link to the book. My yummiest podcasts are all up on that website, as well as a link to the YouTube channel, the blog, and the socials. It's all there.
Great. And I will make sure all of that gets in the show notes. So if you're out driving or jogging or walking with your dog, don't worry about writing it down. I got you covered. Stacey, thank you so much for being here. And I'd like to thank everybody for listening in to the D Shift podcast. And don't forget to tune in again next week. Thanks for listening and supporting the D Shift podcast. If you would like to attend live trainings by our amazing guests and have a chance to ask questions and get answers from our experts, join the D Shift crew. For more details and to sign up, head on over to www.divorcecoachforwomen and click on the podcast page.